Rwanda 1994, Tutsi tribe is performing an act of genocide over Hutu tribe. 300,000 people are already being killed, civilians, children, women, doesn't matter. They're being slaughtered in houses, churches, on the streets. 19 years later, there is still no prosecution of the leader of the Tutsi tribe. Why? Because in Rwanda, the Tutsis are the ones that have the power, and they play card of sovereignty and do not want to allow International Criminal Court to go into Rwanda to investigate this crime against humanity and to have a trial against this Tutsi man. International Criminal Court exists. It has an international panel of judges, lawyers, and prosecutors. It follows international law, which all the UN member countries agree to respect. And the problem is, ladies and gentlemen, that in many cases, justice is not served. Because countries hide alleged criminals, or because when abuse of power happens in some country, victims cannot appeal to national court. And this is where we see the role of the International Criminal Court. The only solution to this problem is to have the International Criminal Court that has the authority to investigate and to prosecute any cases in the world. But the nature of the International Criminal Court is not to investigate and prosecute like irrelevant cases. What International Criminal Court really deals with are cases like genocide or massive killings, cases that are important in international respect. We will have 3 points, 3 constructive points. Firstly, I will talk to you about how basic universal values and rights overcome national sovereignty. Secondly, I will tell you about dysfunctional judicial system where alleged criminals and executors of the punishment are the same actor. And thirdly, my colleague will tell you about the repellent effect of the powerful International Criminal Court. Basic universal values and rights overcome national sovereignty. Value of life and the right to not be massacred as a civilian, let's say a civil war in any war, are universal throughout the world. There is no society in today's world that allows massive killings, that deems this as normal. But the problem is when some societies are partitioned in 2 parties, and when one party is stronger than another party. And the fact is that international law takes care that the criteria for the evaluation of your deeds is not how powerful you are in the country, it's not how close ties you have in the country, but the criteria is whether you have broken international law, whether your deeds go against universal basic human rights that have written in Geneva Convention signed by almost every single country in the world. Now then, the only way how to have global justice to be served is to have some international body that is going to apply these values and principles throughout all the world. And this body, not just a second, sir, cannot be just there like this, but it must have power. Don't you agree?
No, what I disagree with is that the US, China, India, and Russia have not joined the ICC, nor have ratified any of the laws passed by the ICC. So we see that this is not an international body, but it is a very exclusive body.
Thank you, sir. The fact is that what we say is that those countries should go in. The fact is that these countries are UN members. The fact is that these countries have signed Geneva Convention of National Court Basic Human Rights. The fact is that this country agreed to international law to some respect. And the fact is that when International Criminal Court, has the power to investigate and any case, International Criminal Court can investigate this massacre that they happened in China, but later about this. We have a really nice example about Srebrenica massacre. General Milosevic, he was a part of the Serbian army, ordered killings of tens of thousands of civilians, of Bosnian civilians. And the fact is that after civil war, Serbian courts simply didn't prosecute him because he was at the top of the execution heap. But the fact is that they have given him to International Criminal Court after 14 years, and thank you, only after the political regime changed. And the question today is, shouldn't the ICC as an international body have the right and authority to go in? The fact is that approximately 13 war criminals, alleged war criminals that would most probably be recognized as war criminals, cannot be investigated, and cannot be tried at the International Criminal Court because countries simply play this card of authority. But what we say in our proposition is that basic human rights and basic values simply override this claim of authority. Also, what we have to know is that there is this functional judicial system where alleged criminals and the executor of the punishment are the same actor. In modern democracies, we have this notion that courts and politics and economics, like national banks, should be separated institutions. Why? So nobody can overtrip the judicial system. Because when politics is engaged in the judicial system, there cannot be a fair trial towards the politicians. For an example, civil war. When civil war happens, the winning party sets up the courts. The winning party has all the power in the country, and therefore they disregard the losing party. Of course, there will be no, thank you, unfair judgments towards somebody who has committed, let's say, massacre or any crime against humanity. One example I have already given you. This is random. But the second point that we also have to take into account is the abuse of power. And this is this Tiananmen massacre in China that I have talked to you about. Thousands of students were being massacred on one Chinese square. Why? Because they have peacefully demonstrated against the political system in China. And the fact is that Chinese authority simply disregards this basic human right and basic value of life. Why? So they can just go on congratulate this political system. What they did, Chinese army came to tanks, they killed students who were peacefully demonstrating. Why? So just they can set up their power. And this is why this is one of the cases where we believe that the International Criminal Court should have the authority to go in and investigate. Why? Because obviously injustice is happening. And the only way how to have global justice being served is to have such body like the International Criminal Court having the power to apply this principle, universally valid, to specific cases. Yes, sir.
You haven't talked about how they're going to investigate or how they're going to prosecute these people within these countries where they do not have jurisdiction.
Okay, thank you, sir. But this is the base motion that we are talking about. We are talking about whether International Criminal Court as an international body should have the authority which gives them jurisdiction to go in to send their lawyers, to send the prosecutors, to see what has been going on, to have access to media reports, to have access to reports led by the government, and to actually investigate this. And at the end of the day, if they see that somebody is potentially criminal, they can just take him and send him to international court to have a fair trial in front of international panels of judges, lawyers, and prosecutors. This is just what today's debate is about, whether we should give the authority the power to international criminal court. And now, the problem that we have when we have this judicial system that is not fair is that this life of two different humans is not regarded as equally valuable. The life of, let's say, Tutsis and Hutus is not regarded as equally valuable because Tutsis were simply too powerful and regarded the life of Hutus less valuable. But this is happening over and over again throughout the world. It is regarded as not equal, judged by ethnic origin of political views. And the fact is that from the point of view of international community, this simply cannot be happening in today's world. International community should follow this universal principle, should acknowledge that the value of human life is universal, and therefore act upon it. And the only way how to have this universal moral principles, how to be moral world, is to have a strong international court that has the authority to investigate and prosecute people who have done terrible things.
I thank the first government for his speech and now call upon the first opposition speaker. Please wait. It needs to be looking at him.
Okay, all right.
It's like almost the camera, so.
What happened? No?
No.
Now.
Yes.
I'm on. I love
No,
you.
no.
You guys, let me know when you guys are ready.
Not ready.
Sorry, say about
This is
it.
the best I can do.
Do you want to tape it? I haven't taped my back.
No, it's fine.
See that?
I think that you can go okay for a bit more.
Yes.
Yeah.
We deeply sorry about that.
I now call upon the first opposition speaker.
There's a reason why I don't give the reply speeches on my team.
I'm kind of ineffective at refutation. We like to just let me give a first speech really early on and then leave Tommy and Tim to do the rest of the refutation. What side proposition says is that I should give the reply speeches, which is clever. It would be good for them if an ineffective guy like me had more authority. But when we're talking about international policy, it's clearly wrong to give an ineffective organization more authority and more power. We stand on this principally and we stand on this practically. I'm going to talk to you about 3 reasons why we don't think the ICC should have more power. The first is principle and the idea that we should protect national sovereignty and self-determination. The second thing I'm going to talk to you about more is this idea of practicality, and that if we give more power to an ineffective body, we're just making it even less effective. And the third thing that my teammate Tommy's going to talk about in our third argument is it's actually a very racist organization, and he's going to go pretty deep into that. But first, let's talk about the burden of the proposition of today's debate. And what they talked about a lot was, well, we should make the ICC better, and it would be really nice if China and the US and all these other nations joined into the ICC, and that would be great. Yeah, that would be great if the ICC was better and more effective. But it's not. It's very ineffective. And what they have to argue today is not that we should try to make it more effective, but given its current effectiveness, we should expand its authority and its ability to do, or it's the power for it to persecute or investigate things with its given authority. And given its amount of authority right now, we don't think we should add more problems to it. Let's talk to you about their 2 main arguments. They give a principal argument that we should value human rights and stuff like that, and the ICC does a good job of that. We have 2 responses to this. One, we think because it is so ineffective at doing this, it actually devalues human rights. So we're going to go deeper into this argument. But 2, they don't draw a line between when we should value these rights versus the idea of national sovereignty or self-determination, which I'm going to talk about in our first argument. The second thing they talk about that they base most of their case on is this idea that, oh, we need this group because it's going to be effective at stopping crime, and somebody needs to be out there to prevent or to prosecute people involved in the Serbian wars or people that are committing corruption in China. But they haven't proven it's effective at doing this. So why should we give it any power to do so if it's ineffective? Yeah, well, sure, first guy. Yeah.
Do you know that with this, the thing that we are doing today, we're getting the efficiency because we can walk into countries and do things.
That's not what today's debate is about. Today's debate is not about making them better at doing their job. Today's debate is about giving them a bigger job. And we firmly stand on side opposition against doing this. It should not have more authority because it is not effective. They're talking about effectiveness, we are talking about authority. That's what the motion is today. The International Criminal Court should have the authority to investigate and prosecute any crimes. So let's move into our constructive matter as to why we don't think we should give more power to the International Criminal Court. And it goes to these values that we want to talk about. The first is self-determination. And we value the idea that countries should be able to determine for themselves how they pursue issues within their country. We value that there are elected officials in these countries and that there are systems of justice that people in these countries consent to. And because of that, we find value in these democracies or in these systems of justice versus an international body of justice that the people within those countries don't submit their jurisdictions to. We also see that there are lots of different issues and different values in certain places. And because of these different values, we should have individual governments deciding on how to enforce and interpret their different laws, rather than having one international group that may have a different group of laws than somebody else's. We think that it's completely wrong to disregard the individual right of countries to determine for themselves what they think is the best way to do laws, and we think that giving arbitrary rules to, or giving arbitrary authority to an international body is ineffective. No, thank you. And the other thing I want to talk to you about is the value of the social contract. And we value this idea that people give up certain rights to their government to have their government protect them, and we should protect this idea and protect the authority within national governments to promote justice and to establish laws. We think it's important to protect these ideas. Wouldn't you agree?
When the authority of some state engages on genocide of an ethnic group, why is then sovereignty more important than the universal value of human lives?
Explain to me why the ICC is effective at preventing this genocide, and then I will agree. But as I'm going to go into in our second point, it is so bad at its job. It is impressive how awful it is. Let's talk about the history of the ICC court, what it really is. Well, it can't do anything unless countries give it the authority to do so. So the only way that a crime goes to the ICC is if a state recommends it to go to the ICC, or if the UN Security Council recommends that there is an investigation. And even if with this, the state within that country has to then find this person that is being accused and bring them to the ICC. The ICC has no body or police force that can go out and get these people and bring them to the ICC. And then once there's a conviction in the ICC, the state itself then has to carry out the punishment. Rather than the ICC, it has no means of jailing people, and so it needs cooperation from the states. And so we don't think, and because of this, we think it is inherently ineffective versus having national governments. Because if you have a national government that is willing to comply with the ICC, then it's perfectly capable of doing these things itself. But if you see that governments don't comply with it, and you say, oh, you guys have committed a lot of genocide, your government is bad, we're going to now punish you and tell you that you should enforce yourself, it's going to be ineffective because, like we said, these governments are bad, they're not going to enforce themselves. If the ICC says, you guys should stop being bad, there's a reason why they're bad and commit genocide by having the ICC wag their finger at them and saying, oh, you need to prosecute the terrible people in your government. If you're a terrible government, you're not going to do that, you're not going to listen. That's why it's ineffective. And let's look at the history of this court. They've issued 30 warrants for arrests. They have had 5 people of those warrants land in custody. One of those 5 people has been convicted of crime, and yet that conviction is still in the appeal process. So right now, they are 0 for 30 at enforcing justice. 0 for 30. Do you know what percentage point that is? That's 0%. That's worse than an F minus. That's a 0. No, thank you. And we see there are certain problems and we see that clearly there are so many problems within the ICC, and we don't think we should give it more authority. The other thing I'm going to talk about why we shouldn't give it more authority is because there's too much power within certain governments. For example, like we said, because the UN Security Council can make recommendations to it, that gives a lot of power to the hands of France and Great Britain, the two groups of the ICC that are also part of the UN Security Council. But as Tim pointed out in the POI, China and Russia and the United States don't submit any jurisdiction to the ICC. So there are potential problems, obviously, of giving too much power for France or Great Britain to enforce certain laws. One of the implications would be enforcing laws in Muslim states. And France recently banned burqas, and that because of their viewpoint on certain laws towards Muslim nations, there would obviously be a lot of issues if they were trying to enforce their version of how they feel religious laws should be interpreted against a Muslim nation. And we think that will harm international cooperation, that there's likely going to be tension between those two nations if you give those certain countries more authority to make decisions over another country. And so, like we said, there is not enough legitimacy in the ICC to give it more power. If you put more on its plate and tell it you should investigate more crimes, it's going to be even less effective at doing what its job is right now. And if you are ineffective at trying to stop human genocide, you're actually promoting it. And because of that, we stand firmly on side opposition against expanding their jurisdiction. Thank you.
I think the first off their speech and call upon the second government speaker.
I'm sorry. Dear Mr. Speaker, when our first speaker came to the podium today, he started his speech with a strong and important fact from the history. 300,000 people died in Rwanda and nothing happened. First speaker of opposition finishes his speech with talking that ICC is going to ban burqas in Muslim countries. Now we have to think about which side today is taking this debate seriously and who is standing behind the points that they are talking about. I'm going to do 3 points of rebuttal. First one is going to be jurisdiction, second one is going to be sovereignty of the state, and third one are going to be minor points that today's proposition has pointed out. I would start with the inefficiency of the ICC. Well, basically, to sum up the things that today's opposition has said in the first speech is, yeah, okay, they agree with us
that nowadays ICC with the current program is not efficient. But what we are saying on the side of proposition today, that in the motion, any case, power to control, investigate, and execute, or something like that, any case, means that we have the power to work with cases that are now protected by the government of the states. No, thank you. We are dealing with the cases that have been protected by the sovereignty cards and so on and so on. We have the power to walk into countries. We agree on the point that nowadays ICC doesn't have the army to walk into a country and kill a dictator. But what we are saying is by expanding the authority, by expanding the power, we are giving the opportunity to ICC to do such things. No, thank you. Inefficiency. No, thank you. Inefficiency of the ICC. Yeah, we agree on this point, but this is the example. We have given you Rwanda. Rwanda haven't done anything, no, thank you, about their own criminals because they're having the same government for 19 years. In Serbia, Milosevic has been protected for 14 years because Serbian government was protecting him. What we are doing today is that such governments that want to protect massive criminals are not going to be protected by the government that did such crimes. And this is the point why we are increasing the authority, and with increasing the authority, we are giving bigger power to the ICC on a global level. But going on, no thank you, going on to the point of sovereignty. Dear judges and dear opposition, listen carefully at this point. Do you, side opposition, support the execution of Osama bin Laden? And this goes to the point of sovereignty. Are you saying that it was fair? No, thank you. The United States of America walked into the country of Afghanistan and killed Osama bin Laden while you are arguing that the country has its sovereignty to deal with the criminals in its own state? Please, we are waiting for a response in the second speech. Moving on to sovereignty, we're talking about here everything that my first speaker has said. If you have the government that is making its own laws, making its own jurisdiction, judicial power, we're saying, of course they're not going to execute such people. Of course they're not doing well in the law. We're talking about global justice. If we have Rwanda, which accepts the genocide, of course nothing is going to happen. But when we are putting on the way like 300,000 dead innocent people and sovereignty of the state of Uganda, I think that you can answer to this question yourself, dear judges, today. Moving on to the points, like the minor points that we have heard today. Like one of the strongest statements the first speaker had made today in the latest minutes of his speech were that USA has no power of the ICC because it's not, that countries like France and Germany has power over the ICC and USA doesn't. Look, dear judges, if USA wants to have power over the ICC, if China wants to have power over the ICC, then go into the ICC, become a member of the ICC. No, thank you. One example, one realistic example about the USA. When Japan got bombed by USA in the middle of the Second World War, there was massive murder on the Japan side. What is going on today? USA, United States of America, are still giving medals for the veterans because they have been participating in the Second World War. And on the other side, we have Japan that still haven't fixed all the problems, no thank you, that Americans have done by dropping the atomic bombs. On this side, we are saying, is this universal law? Is this correct that on one side, people are breached, people get awards for their events and their actions, and on the other side, people are still suffering? We are kindly begging the United States of America to come to ICC and face with the problems they have made. No, thank you. But moving to my constructive, this is repellent effect of the ICC and when we believe that this is going to happen under the new system, our proposition. What we see today, how laws basically work. Laws work in a way that when you read a law, when you see that something bad is going to happen to you, if you do something bad, you're afraid of it. You have that fear factor that is preventing individual, group of people, or a country to do something bad. No, thank you. When you're seeing that if you are going to punch someone, if you're going to murder someone, if you're going to murder like 300,000 people, that something really bad is going to happen to you, you have the fear factor. What is going on in the systems that we are opposing today? Why we are expanding the authority is, again, case of Rwanda. It was not written in their judicial system that they cannot kill 300,000 people because the government was the one that made the laws, and the people, no thank you, that committed actions didn't have the fear factor. What we're doing with imposing universal international law, no thank you, of the ICC on a global level, we are preventing such actions. We are preventing that governments that don't have correct or maybe universal or very good judicial system and laws are going to obey international laws. They're not going to, no thank you, they're not going to work in accordance with what their government has posed, but they're going to work with some universal laws, as our example was, with according to United Nations. What we see on this point is that if we are having oppressive regimes that are fixing their own laws, that are fixing their own situation in the state, they will lose the power of doing so. They will be afraid of the international policy. They will be afraid of international sphere. Why? Because in the minute that international law is the one controlling situation in that country, that regime, that system, that politician is aware of the fact that in this moment, there can be a flaw of diplomatic, political pressure from the international sphere on that country because they know that, no thank you, because they know that the ICC has greater power over them, because they know that they cannot hide their own criminals, because they are aware of the fact that such actions are not allowed in the global sphere anymore. This is the reason why ICC is going to become efficient in our case. This is the reason why our proposition is still standing today, and none of the arguments given by today's side of proposition are standing anymore, because they are talking about current ICC, why current ICC in this moment might be inefficient. We are saying, okay, we accept this point, but we are giving ICC the power, we're reducing the power of the oppressive regimes, we are reducing the power of inefficient judicial systems in many different countries around the world, and we are giving the right to the people, we are giving justice, universal justice to the people in those countries. Because now, Japan's and Americans are going to have the same rights, and Germans and people in Rwanda are going to finally need the same justice. And this is what the people are waiting for, because we are the ones that are doing right for the people, because we are the ones that are not breaking sovereignty, we are just taking care for the global justice. Please go with proposition.
I now call upon the second op speaker.
I'm going to start my speech by reading you guys the motion, because clearly team proposition doesn't understand what it really means. It's that this House believes that the ICC should have the authority to investigate and prosecute any case. What does it mean to have the authority? Having the authority means that they are able to go in and do whatever they want. What does authority not mean? Authority does not mean that all of a sudden the ICC becomes effective because it has the ability to go and prosecute more crimes. There's a distinction between the authority and the actual mechanisms in which they're going to enforce. And that's what the focus of my speech is going to be about. Let's talk about a court system. A court system is always going to have a certain amount of cases. Let's say that the only thing they prosecute right now is crimes against humanity, war crimes, genocide, and crimes of aggression, like the ICC. There are 4 types of crimes that can be possibly prosecuted under the status quo. They've only had 30 trials, 30 possible people who could be convicted. 5 of the people were detained, and one person, and only one person, was actually able to be tried, and they are currently in the appellate process. Now, where does this get me? If we expand the amount of things that can be tried under the ICC, not just 4 things, but 5, 6, you name it, because they can go in any instance, that doesn't mean that the ICC becomes stronger. That just means that more things can be prosecuted under the ICC. What does this do? This makes the court even more inefficient. More cases in the ICC means less cases completed. The proposition does not ever explain a model in which they're actually able to have an enforcement mechanism that is able to provide a way to solve the problem they're claiming. This is going to uproot all of their arguments, all of them, because all of them rest on the specific crux that increasing the amount of cases somehow actually increases the power of the court. Sure.
Debate is not about increasing the amount of cases. Debate is about having the authority to go and investigate. This is the problem why so many cases haven't been solved, because you cannot go into a country, get data, you cannot take criminal.
That's right. I understand.
This is what it is.
Okay, so I don't think that the proposition understood exactly what I was saying. Because what I was saying is that the distinction between going in and getting more cases versus actually solving the cases. If we look at the statistics, unfortunately, Luke apparently doesn't know what an F minus is, because 0 is still an F minus. But 0 is a 0. No cases have actually been completed. If more cases, as they're saying, more cases can be prosecuted in the ICC, that 0 stays at 0. That is what it means. They're not actually increasing efficacy. Now, let's actually go into the individualistic argument. Let's start on the, so what I've just done is I've cleared up the second proposition argument, talking about individuals. Now, let's talk about self-determination, the first opposition argument. There are two distinct reasons why, and as a principle, we believe in self-determination. The first is, natural sovereignty. The first is self-determination, and the second is the social contract. They bring up the argument about Osama bin Laden, whether or not that was justified, and whether or not we believe that the U.S. was justified in doing it. If that was the debate that they want to have, they should have chosen motion 2, about whether or not America has really done more good than harm since 1945. But that's not the point of this debate. Secondly, them going into Afghanistan is not able to just be discussed in this round because of whether or not the actual implications. And third of all, this is a principled argument. We're saying that the principle of national sovereignty necessarily has to come first. Now, let's go on to the proposition's arguments and why they're inherently flawed. The first argument is talking about Rwanda and how Rwanda, there's atrocities. We do not disagree that the Rwanda genocide was inherently bad. But there's a problem to this. As in the status quo, the UN Security Council has the authority to be able to suggest an intervention and investigation in certain countries. They accepted that, and this is already brought up as what the status quo definition is. That means that the UN Security Council could have already had this type of investigation done so. What does this mean? That they're not truly doing it. The second problem with this is, again, not actually doing the efficacy arguments, because all they're doing is saying that more cases will be brought. If the actual council right now cannot do anything whatsoever, how is it supposed to actually prosecute more cases and solve more problems? If the same amount of people, the same amount of courts, and the same amount of resources that are going into this aren't actually changing, but they have more cases to solve, this makes no sense. Now, the second argument talks about the political aspects of it and how this is the third argument. Sorry, talking about the fear factor. The fear factor argument is incorrect for multiple reasons. The first is the example of North Korea. North Korea keeps doing nuclear testing. They are having human rights violations. They're starving their people. And what do they keep doing? They keep doing it because there's no actual intervention even though this is a clear violation of international law. This is empirically proven that their point about the fear factor does not work. Secondly, the citizens, if the violations are inherently so bad, the citizens always have the option to be able to uprise against the government, which is able to track that back. And finally, again, as I need to emphasize that the proposition must answer is that the advocacy of this is the ultimate process. Now, I'd like to move on to the third argument, talking about how the ICC is racist. Yeah, what does the ICC stand for? It stands for the International Criminal Court. But what has it actually prosecuted? Of the 18 cases that have actually gone to the ICC, every single person was from Africa. Every single person on trial is from Africa. It's not the International Criminal Court, it's the African Criminal Court. It's very clear.
Okay, sir.
Specifically, there are still former Nazi regime leaders currently hiding in Argentina and being confirmed, but that are not being prosecuted or not even being appealed to. What does this mean? That very clearly there is a racial bias against Africans in this specific court. The United States, their justification for not entering the ICC was specifically because it was racist. In addition, even the African Union has claimed that the ICC is discriminatory and racist. What does this prove today? This is going to be overturned. This is going to be answered back multiple other arguments. The first is that it answers back to the argument about talking about the individual's human rights, the inherent human rights of individuals. The ICC is denying the equality of human rights because they're only one group of people are going to be responsible. Only one. Only Africans are actually responsible for crimes, and those are the only ones that are actually going to be prosecuted. That is a denial of human rights and a universalistic principle. Their first argument, because they're saying it is okay for an international body of justice to suppress these people. In addition, it is exacerbating the problem. It is making it significantly worse because this body is supposed to be standing for justice, for the betterment of everyone in society. If the body that is supposed to enforce justice is really racist, that is not justice for all. That is, or giving each their due, which is the definition of justice. It is injustice. As a principle, we should be rejecting instances of racism, institutionalized forms of racism, as it fundamentally undermines any type of justice that is supposed to be actually permitted. But besides the principle of stopping racism, we also believe that there are many types of practical impacts of it. For example, as they said, the violence that happened in Rwanda was because of the Hutus and the Tutsis being racially divided and because of that. In addition, the tension between North and South Korea, China and Japan, the tension between between these countries are all based upon racial tension. There's very clear that violence ultimately erupts when there's specific institutionalized forms of racism. And because we believe that this must be stopped, I'm proud to oppose.
I now call upon the third guest speaker.
Dear judges, it was quite hard to even listen to what we have heard in the last part of the opposition speech. But still, as a third speaker, my role is to give a calm and structured rebuttal. I will try my best not to get too emotional. First, I'll be talking about some clarifications. Then I'm going to move to the three major analyses. First, I'll be talking about is ICC efficient, or why ICC will be more efficient. Second, I'll be talking about sovereignty versus life. And lastly, I'll be reflecting our unrebutted arguments on the first 3 seconds. But firstly, I want to just clear something up. We believe that the case of the side of opposition can only stand halfways. Why is that so? Because they themselves have made a major strategical error and contradicted themselves. Why is it so? Because one of their major arguments is ICC is inefficient, and second is ICC does so much harm. If ICC is inefficient, then it cannot do harm, ladies and gentlemen. It cannot be racist. It cannot impose racist laws in the Middle East. It cannot incarcerate African Americans just because it is racist, if it is truly inefficient. But, no thank you, sir. If it is indeed racist, then it is also inefficient. I kindly beg the third speaker to write this down. No thank you. Please decide which case side you are taking. So, what do we also want to clear out? No thank you. There are accusing us that we're imposing more cases to ICC, but this is a flaw. We believe that we're not imposing more cases. We're tackling the same cases on an earlier stage. Because what is the current problem with ICC is that you do not know whether some case is under your authority. What we are doing is that we are tackling the cases further on in their investigation before there is evidence of the state that is corrupt, that this indeed was the case for ICC. We believe that we are not expanding the cases necessarily in number, but we are expanding the span of the investigation, which can begin earlier and is therefore more efficient and more thorough. This is what we believe how we are expanding the role of ICC, not at all. First of the major points, why is ICC efficient under our policy? Here they give you the argument that ICC is inefficient, and their analysis is as follows. States find people and investigate cases, therefore ICC is inefficient because states are inefficient at giving people to ICC and investigating cases. Exactly. This is why we would give the right to ICC to investigate a case before they even know whether
before they are able to investigate it under the current policy. They will not have to wait for the evidence of an unfunctional state or for the vote of Security Council to go investigate a case. We believe not that this is a major point in efficiency, because if they have to wait 14 years, as Denis has told you, for governments to change it, for Milosevic to be sent to Hague, this is a detriment to investigation. Not thinking, we believe that this is what we are solving. And second reason why they give you, why ICC is inefficient, is they say it has no body that would actually investigate things. Well,
it has no body of enforcing these rules.
Thank
That's
you.
why it's ineffective, because it can't do anything.
Okay, thank you very much. So it can't do anything because it doesn't have body to enforce such rules that we are proposing. But why would it have a body to impose rules which are currently not legal? When we believe that once our legislation passes through, it will gain a body that will be able to impose these processes. We believe that, of course, I mean, it's just like saying, I don't know, Vatican doesn't have an army. No, of course, because under current legislation, it doesn't have an army. But if it passes a legislation to have an army, it will have an army. It's a truism. No, thanks. No, not at all. Furthermore, what it is here they come also, we have several mechanisms why it will be even more efficient. We give it actually, now you have to get evidence from state or wait for a vote of Security Council. Now, if state is inefficient, or one country in Security Council is blocking the investigations,